As I mentioned at the beginning of the Mass today, we have the rite of election, and leave it to the church to make a big thing even out of signing a book. But it's symbolic and it's important. These adults that are here, and 11 children who were at the last Mass, and one more at the 12:30, have all been discerning, and the young ones with the help of their parents. But these are adults. They've discerned, they've come to the conclusion that it is God inviting them into celebrating, receiving all the sacraments of initiation. And the rite of elect means, just like you elect somebody to office, that God is electing you today, inviting you. And the way that you symbolically say yes is that you sign the book of the elect. And it's a good idea because, like if you buy a car or a house, what makes it official? When you sign the documents, okay? Till you put the name on the check, forget it. You can hand an empty check to somebody and it doesn't mean anything. But once you sign it, whatever amount of money you put on there, you're going to lose it unless you don't have it in the bank in the first place, and then you shouldn't be writing checks like that. But today, this is the celebration, the rite of election. And I think that it very beautifully happens on this first Sunday of Lent because of these particular scriptures. I want to mention, first of all, that there's a number used today, 40 days. It's the 40 days and nights of Lent and the wandering of the Jews in the desert for 40 years. There is a thing we call numerology, and in the Bible, numerology is used to express the importance of certain things. For example, 3 is an important number in the scriptures, and just in life. What do we do with the Dodgers? 1, 2, 3 strikes, you're out. Or what do we do when we talk to, especially to children, and they're not listening? Say, I told you once, I told you twice, you better not have me say it a third time. 3 strikes and you're out. So in the scriptures, whenever 3 comes up, you can be sure that there's a significance being spoken through that number. Another one is 7. You've heard this said a million times here. 7 is the perfect number in the Bible. Whenever something has the number 7 attached to it, it is saying it's complete, it's full, it can't be any better, it's perfection. 40 is another one. And 40 because of the length of time. 40 is not the end of the world, but it's certainly more than 3 or 7, 10. But 40 is a chunk of time that's significant. I'm not a psychologist, but they say if you can do a new habit for 40 days or stop doing something, like say you want to stop smoking, if you're able to accomplish that over 40 days faithfully, intentionally, then it's likely that it will stick. It's likely that you will have formed a new habit or broken a bad habit. So 40 years the Jews wandered in the desert. God saved them, Moses says in the first reading. God saved them from the slavery of Egypt. They were being oppressed. And God sent Moses and saved them from the oppression of the Egyptians. But then they wandered for 40 years in the desert. Now, in those days, a lot of people wouldn't even live for 40 years. But the whole nation spent 40 years of wandering before they came to the land flowing with milk and honey. And that was the promise given them and the promise that they actually did receive. In the second reading, we're hearing in this letter to the Romans about how God has saved us through his son Jesus. And of course, we're focused on the cross, and we know that this is the climax of this season, and then followed by the bigger climax, the resurrection. But all of it speaks of the salvation that we have gotten through Jesus Christ. And that's why baptism, confirmation, and then receiving Eucharist is so important, because that's the promise offered and the promise given, and then the promise received by all of our catechumens. But this Gospel of Luke, I hope I don't shock you when I say these things, but I have my doubts, even though this is in all the scriptures, that this happened exactly as said, for a couple reasons. 40 days without eating any food. I don't think you could live through that. Is that symbolic? Perhaps. Then these particular temptations, the second one, it says that then the devil took him, Jesus, up and showed him all the kingdoms of the world in a single instant. What does that mean? How would you see all the kingdoms of the world in an instant? And then the last temptation, it says, took him up on the parapet of the temple, up on the tower, and said, jump, jump. Don't worry. God said he'd send angels to hold on to you so you wouldn't even dash your foot against a stone. But he says you will not put the Lord your God to the test. And then that was the end of the temptations. But the real point, I think, of these scriptures is the condition of Jesus. 40 days without food, maybe without drink, out in the desert where it gets cold at night and hot during the day, no friends or anybody around him to protect him or to encourage or support him. Would depression and other emotional stuff come in when he's hungry and vulnerable? It's kind of like the vulnerability of the cross. That's where Jesus was most vulnerable. But he began his ministry in a vulnerable way too, out in the desert being tempted with power and position and even God's rescuing him in an instant with his angels. And I think that's the point, vulnerability. It was there in vulnerability that he had to put his trust in God the most, and he did. And for everything that the devil tried to do to tempt him, he came back speaking the word of God. And there he was, safe and sound with God and his Spirit. That's what this Lent is about. And if I had to sum it up in a word, the word for me would be journey. We're being asked for these 40 days and 40 nights to go on a journey with Christ, to, as it were, go into the desert. And that's why we have the practice of giving up things. We call it penance, but it really is to deprive ourselves of something we like. This is an old practice. It's a little bit more negative. We did it a lot when I was a kid. There were people that say you can't dance, you can't listen to music. People were giving up their beer and their smoking and chocolate candy, whatever. But it often made people miserable. As I told on Ash Wednesday, I told on a priest friend of mine that I've known since high school seminary, and we've been friends for 60 years. And every Lent, he used to give up drinking beer. He loved this one kind of Mexican beer. It was his favorite. So he'd give up beer, and then his face would, I hate Lent, because he gave up his beer. I begged him, here, let me buy you 2 beers. Please, drink a beer and be happy. You're not supposed to be miserable during Lent. We're supposed to go out into this desert with Christ and ask Christ to be there for us and with us. And so we begin to experience spiritually something more. So one of the reasons, the better reason than doing penance, the better reason for giving up something that we like, depriving ourselves of something we like, because perhaps the spiritual gift that we will receive is compassion. You know, if you go down by the river, the people living along the river or under the freeways, sleeping on cement, and how many of them miss a meal on this day or that day, maybe 2 or 3 days in a row even. Poor people. And they're completely vulnerable, especially when it's cold and wet and damp. And maybe if we deprive ourselves of something we really like, give it up joyfully, maybe the gift will be compassion, that we will next time pass them along the river or under the freeway, and our heart will really go out to them. Maybe we'll give them some money, I don't know. But we will feel for them because they are worse off than we are. That's what I think the scriptures are offering us today, so that it could change our hearts to love more, be more compassionate, even perhaps generous, kind. Maybe we would take care of someone on the block once a week during this Lent and offer to go to the store for them or just visit with them, you know, especially if they're widow or a widower or a widow, and maybe just to visit, just to join them for some time to listen to them. What will we do for Lent? What's our journey going to look like? And if there were 300 people here, maybe there will be 300 different journeys, 300 different ways of experiencing this. But this is a great season, and we start it by welcoming these adults into the final stages of preparing for their baptism.